Okay, good morning, everybody. This week's module, we're going to talk about the classroom library. And to think about your classroom library and supporting writers, we have to get beyond just the ideas of narrative versus expository writing and get ourselves out into the real world of writing. So first of all, back from module one, remember Halliday. We're talking about seven different purposes that he outlined that people have for using language. And what I find is that those frequently come in combos. So imagine that you have the heuristic function of language where somebody's trying to solve a problem with their talk. They'll often involve other people in that in various ways. So you might have the heuristic function going on along with the interactional function, just needing somebody else to help you solve that problem. Or you could even have people directing other people, which would give you the heuristic plus the regulatory function. So I find that those seven often come, and in almost all authentic language, come in combos. So that gets us beyond the narrative versus expository, because we find that in most real world writing, we're going to see combinations of various types of writing to serve the purposes that people are trying to accomplish. So trying to figure out what people are trying to do with the writing is far more important than labeling them with things like narrative and expository, especially if you're going to try to get people writing around the school year. There's nothing wrong with coming back to those ideas of narrative and expository to help them prepare for test types of writing. But if you're going to support a full year of writing, you've got to go way beyond that and out into the purposes. So yes, we're going to have novels and picture books, and I'm just going to come over here, and I've got a few of these nice examples. I love having a lot of Polly Horvath in my classroom. She's very edgy and kind of fun to read. Uh, Regarding the fountain, tale in letters of liars and blah blah blah. So this is a book that's written in different kinds of letters and authentic text and so on. And then you've got your classic picture book format, and I like to have a lot of great picture books in my classroom too. So and we know the formats for these things. With picture books, the one thing that I want to emphasize for you is that you may or may not have actually shown kids how to do a storyboard. A great way to do that is to go out and find on the internet, you can find clear copies of Disney's storyboarding process, where they do the sketching to show us how the scenes are going to be laid out and so on. So yes, novels and picture books, but what we've found over time is that most classroom libraries suffer because they don't have enough popular fiction in them. And when I'm talking popular fiction, I'm talking about the things that kids really want to read. We may have cast-off copies, things that we've gotten from garage sales and thrift stores and so on. But kids want the fiction that actually goes with the popular media that they're consuming at the time. So don't be afraid in your classroom to have a lot of TV, movies, and video games types of books that go along with those, and enough copies of them to go around. What we hear from kids who are struggling with reading is that at school they can't get the books that they want to read, and there are never enough copies of them in the school library or in the classroom library. So the kids who are struggling with reading have the least opportunity to get the books that would help them the most. And those books that would help them the most are going to be the ones that are going to be the best mentor text for them. So reading and writing together. So now, uh, yeah, we're going to have novels and picture books. That's pretty typical. But now let's look at what an actual classroom library would look like that supports writers. And that's how we get to death and vegetables. Okay, let's get there. Okay. So the big question that I would have for you is that if you think that your classroom library actually supports real world writing, I would immediately ask you, how many death certificates do you have? This is one of the best death certificates I ever found. We were looking for death certificates to go along with a social studies unit that involved the early 1900s. We were talking about how the flu killed so many people back in 1918 and 1919. And so I went to the internet to look for online death certificates so that we could see a lot of influenza. And what I found was that in 1918, 1919, when I was looking for flu, I found a lot of other interesting things going on, and this one immediately jumped out to me because when I was looking at influenza as the cause of death, I suddenly looked at this one: cyanide potassium poisoning, contributory, suicide, Charles Aufrichtig, occupation, president of a copper and steel manufacturing in St. Louis, son of immigrants from Hungary and Bohemia, Czechoslovakia. What we found when we were looking at this was there were a lot of things that just didn't add up. Uh, who was this person? What happened? And that was the beginning of kind of an approach to looking at vital records as a form of written language that's out there, and you can put together a story of someone based on the facts around their death. A few years ago, I actually found that this is the written record of Abraham Lincoln's death. There was before we actually did death certificates in our country. This is the attending physician's notes that were written up afterwards. These were only found in about 2010, 2012. They were just in a file folder or in a file cabinet somewhere in Washington, D.C., and somebody found them tucked off in the middle of nowhere, and then they published them on the internet as quickly as they could. So I've got a lot of death certificates in here, various types, including death certificates from my own ancestors so that I can show people things that happened with my family. This is my great-grandfather, and I can talk about these as being actual um, family archives. So another interesting one that I found where it was a person who died of drowning, a laborer, and so on. So interesting things that are happening in the world. Here's someone who died of despondency, and then shotgun wound through chest, self-inflicted. Again, this is something I would probably do with some older kids, sixth graders, other middle school kids, and so on. So let's see what this is. Oh, yeah, so then I go to famous people. John Winston Ono Lennon, John Lennon's death certificate from the state of New York. Francis Albert Sinatra, Frank Sinatra's death certificate. John Simon Ritchie, otherwise known as Sid Vicious of the Sex Pistols. Then we get into the 1800s. Before death certificates were actually a thing, there was a death register that was kept. And this is what most people find if they do some kind of family history, is that you find your ancestors in a register of deceased persons. So do you have death certificates? That's kind of the extreme question that I have for you. If you don't have death certificates, what else could you have that involves vital records? This is blowing open the world of what writing could look like, and doing a study on death certificates as opposed to doing a study on narrative versus expository text. Is this narrative or is it expository? What I was hoping to show you was that it's definitely an expository kind of document, but for each of those documents, there's clearly a story behind it, and that's what kids often want to talk about. Vegetables. Do you have seed packets in your classroom? I found these a good number of years ago. High Mowing Seeds has a great catalog, but look at this. You've got all of these areas of text. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, all of these different areas of text on a seed packet. What are they all doing? Why are they there? What service do they function? What function do they serve? So we want to have this kind of thing in our classroom. Do you have death and vegetables in your classroom? It's fun to put together ideas about how would you make arugula sound good to someone. High Mowing Seeds does it a particular way. Kids can invent vegetables and talk about vegetables just like anybody can. And I don't know if this is the direction you want to go, but again, I'm going to bring you back here. An actual classroom library that supports writers, you've got to get real world text in here. So now I've got a full buffet out here for you. I'm just going to walk you through these things quickly and ask you, do you have multiple copies of this in your classroom library that kids want to look at? Do you have sheet music where it has the lyrics along with the music? Do you have recipe books and food books? Do you have a variety of books that are based on visuals rather than words? Do you have a record player and some records? Do you have a CD player and the CD inserts that go with them? These records, kids' records that you find, are filled with different kinds of text that people might be more interested in than a book. Maps and guides. This is the one for A Basin. This is the one for California Adventure. Plays. Yes, readers' theater, but do you have kids actually looking at theater? Inserts from DVDs and video games. Travel books. Informational books, yeah. Do you have the big ones that have tons of stuff in them? Do you have books on the paranormal? Kids love looking into these things on the paranormal. Some of the best books on the paranormal are going to be these ones that don't have as many pictures in them, but where the stories are only about a page long. You can get kids into some reading that doesn't take them any longer than 10 or 15 minutes, and they get the complete story. For a lot of struggling readers, this kind of text, this sort of almost Guinness Book of World Records length sort of reading is going to be, look at that, St. Francis the Fire Handler article, about a half a page worth of reading to get the whole thing. Imperishable Eloquence, so on. This book circulated a lot in my classrooms and books like it. You can get books like this that are much more kid-friendly too if you've got primary grades kids. This is straight from the Reader's Digest, was not necessarily written for kids. How many menus do you have in your classroom? I find that I just like to ask at restaurants if I can have an insert from the menu. This, of course, is just one that you can take for catering, but usually local restaurants have much more interesting writing than your chain restaurants do, because they have a standardized approach to menuing, and your local restaurants are actually going to have much more interesting writing underneath their items to make the stuff sound yummy. Okay. Comics. When I was a kid, comics were banned. Teachers took them away from us, but a lot of kids are going to learn to read with this. You can still get comics, and you can still get the comics with these, if you go to a comic store, the ones with the cassette tapes in them, so that it supports a listening station. So many of the primary grades teachers that I've worked with have had extremely great success with coffee table books as well, because of the high visual content and the fact that they're supported with captions that don't take a lot of reading. We often find that primary grades kids will sit and do a lot more reading with a coffee table book. Do you see how that works, that they're supported with a little bit of supporting text in these captions on the side? And a lot of the coffee table books that are out there are going to be based on places and things, topics that kids will find fascinating and interesting. One of the best circulating coffee table books I've ever had in my classroom was this Treasures of Childhood book, which is just a big book of old toys. Toys and picture books, card collections. I think some more of the toys are in the back, things like zoetropes and so on. Just a quick video. So your classroom library, is it providing the variety of mentor text that kids actually need to get them out there and thinking about what is the function? What is this trying to do for me? And I'm going to stop here because this is its own lecture. I really want you to get that idea of we need all these different types of text to be out there for us. I'm going to stop and dig in a little bit more deeply for you with my folder of text here in just a moment. I've got a lot of real world text here just in this folder that I often work with kids, and I'll do a separate video where I take you in a little bit deeper on Swiss Miss hot chocolate. All right.